Living in the north wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a daily battle against a cold so brutal it could freeze the fluid in your eyes in minutes. While we panic today when the Wi-Fi goes down, the Vikings faced temperatures of 30-degree Moinota with nothing but wood, dirt, and their own blood to keep them alive. That is colder than the inside of your deep freezer. A temperature where metal sticks to skin and breath turns instantly to ice fog. Yet, they didn't just survive these Arctic nightmares. They thrived, waking up warm enough to conquer nations with a single watt of electricity or a drop of gas. Their survival wasn't luck. It was a masterpiece of engineering and biological hacking that turns our modern understanding of comfort upside down. They understood that heat was a finite resource more precious than gold. And they designed their entire existence around trapping every single calorie of warmth before it could escape. It starts with the architecture of their homes, which weren't just shelters but sophisticated thermal batteries designed to harvest heat from the earth itself.
It is the best
But before you
harvest
can
we've had in
understand how they
years.
stayed warm,
We should
you
celebrate.
have to understand the house itself.
We struck
It wasn't
hard at
built
the
like a
monastery.
modern home.
The monks
It
scattered
was
like
built
sheep.
like a bunker
The
against the
gold
death
is
of winter.
ours.
Vikings didn't have fiberglass insulation or drywall. They built with the raw bones of the land. Stacked timber, massive stones, and thick blocks of turf. The walls were essentially a survival sandwich, featuring an inner layer of wood and an outer shell of earth that acted like a medieval version of high-density spray foam. Inside, they avoided dividing the house into separate rooms because walls block airflow.
Did you see the
And in a
Duke's
Viking
face when she
home,
arrived?
sharing
He was
one
quite
massive
flushed,
space meant
wasn't he?
sharing one massive heat source. Ceilings were kept intentionally low and sloped, forcing the rising heat to stay down where the people were, rather than pooling uselessly in the rafters. Up above, the roof was doing the heavy lifting, covered in layers of birch bark and sod that could be up to 2 feet thick. This living roof would soak up water and freeze in the winter, creating an impenetrable barrier of ice and earth that sealed the house tight against the howling wind. In the spring, grass would sprout on top, blending the home into the hillside and further insulating the structure with a root system that held the heat in. It was organic architecture at its finest, utilizing the thermal mass of the ground to regulate the temperature inside. But a well-insulated box is just a coffin if you don't have a heat source. And the way Vikings managed fire was dangerous, smoky, and absolutely brilliant. At the heart of every Viking home sat the long hearth, a fire pit that was never allowed to roar but was kept in a constant, controlled smolder. They didn't build chimneys because a chimney acts like a vacuum cleaner, sucking all the hot air out of the room along with the smoke. Instead, they relied on a small vent hole in the roof that allowed the smoke to drift out lazily, creating a smoke lid near the ceiling that trapped the heat below it. Yes, it was smoky, but the smoke served a dual purpose. It cured the meats hanging from the rafters and coated the timber in soot, making the wood fire-resistant and bug-proof. The fire management was an art form. They burned slow-release fuels like hardwoods, peat, and even dried animal dung when the timber ran low. The ash from the fire wasn't thrown away. It was packed into the cracks of the floorboards to act as a seal, preventing cold drafts from seeping up from the frozen ground. This central fire cured the walls with heat day after day, turning the entire structure into a dry, warm oven that retained its temperature, even when the blizzard outside was raging. So the air was warm, but the ground was still a block of ice. How do you sleep on frozen dirt without catching hypothermia? You use the oldest trick in the book. Sleeping on the ground in a Viking winter is a death sentence, so they raised their beds on wooden benches lined along the walls. By elevating their sleeping platforms, they moved their bodies out of the cold sink that settles on the floor and positioned themselves closer to the warm air trapped by the low ceiling. These benches were often enclosed with thick wool curtains or animal hides, creating small body-heated pods within the larger room. To supercharge their beds, they utilized a trick that feels surprisingly modern: the hot water bottle, Viking style. Before bed, they would take smooth river stones from the fire pit, wrap them in thick layers of sheepskin or fur, and slide them under their blankets. These stones, heated to over 150 degrees, would radiate warmth for hours, keeping feet and hands from getting frostbitten long after the main fire had died down. It was a dangerous game if the stone was too hot. It could burn the bedding, but it was a risk worth taking for a night of uninterrupted sleep. But heated stones can only do so much. To truly survive the coldest nights, the Vikings invited some very smelly, very large guests into their living room. This might be the strangest survival trick of all. Inside the longhouse, the Vikings lived side by side with their livestock. Cows, goats, and sheep were brought indoors for the winter, partitioned off at one end of the house, turning the home into a shared barn. It sounds unsanitary to modern ears, but a 1,000-pound cow acts like a biological radiator, putting off an immense amount of body heat that contributed significantly to the ambient temperature. The layout was intentional. The animal stalls were often dug slightly lower than the human living area, trapping the cold air in the pit while the animal heat rose to the family. The smell was undoubtedly potent, but in a world without central heating, the scent of manure was the scent of survival. By sharing their space with the animals, they also protected their most valuable assets from freezing to death or being eaten by wolves, ensuring the family's wealth survived to see the spring.
To the west! Aye, chieftain.
It was a symbiotic relationship where the animals got shelter and the humans got a living, breathing heating system that ran on hay. Animals provided background heat, but the most efficient heater was the person sleeping next to you. In a Viking home, personal space was a luxury they couldn't afford. A Viking longhouse wasn't built for privacy. It was built for thermal efficiency, meaning everyone slept together. The human body radiates heat equivalent to a 100-watt light bulb. So, piling 5 or 6 family members into one bed created a thermal mass that could raise the temperature under the blankets by 30 degrees. Parents, children, elders, and even dogs huddled together under massive coverings made of sewn-together sheepskins or reindeer hides. This communal sleeping arrangement was critical. If one person got cold, the group warmed them up, creating a safety net against hypothermia. They didn't just share blankets, they wore their insulation, mastering the onion method of layering clothes 1,000 years before hikers gave it a name. They wore linen undergarments to wick moisture, followed by wool tunics that retained heat even when wet, and topped it all with windproof fur clothes. Wool was their secret weapon because it contains lanolin, a natural oil that makes the fabric water resistant and capable of trapping warm air even in damp conditions. They had the heat, the house, and the clothes. But they also knew how to use the sun, even when it barely rose above the horizon. The Vikings practiced passive solar heating centuries before architects coined the term. They oriented their longhouses so the long walls faced south, maximizing the exposure to the weak winter sun and allowing the stone foundations to absorb solar energy during the day. They kept windows small, tiny slits covered with translucent animal membranes, to let in light without letting out the precious heat. These membranes acted like primitive double glazing, creating a barrier that stopped the wind while trapping the sun's warmth inside the stone and earth of the home. At night, they would shutter these small openings with thick wooden boards and furs, sealing the house as tight as it could. The stone floors and earthen walls, having soaked up the heat from the fire and the sun all day, would slowly release that stored energy back into the room at night. It was a system of thermal banking, depositing heat during the day to withdraw it when the temperature plummeted after dark. Modern life is starting to look a lot more like the past, with people returning to wood stoves and thermal mass to escape rising energy costs. But could you actually build one of these survival fortresses? We look at these methods as primitive, but in reality, they are sophisticated solutions to extreme problems. Today, as the power grid becomes less reliable and energy prices skyrocket, the Viking philosophy of hold on to the heat is becoming relevant all over again. We are relearning that a house should work with the environment, not just fight against it with an air conditioner. But knowing how to heat the house is only half the battle. First, you have to build it. The Vikings could erect a weatherproof, insulated, family-sized home in just 8 hours using no power tools and no nails. A feat that modern construction crews would struggle to match.
We need more wood for the fire soon.
Let the men fetch it when they return. How they built these indestructible shelters from scratch before the sun went down. You need to watch the next video.
Weak. He fears the
Click
southern
right
kings.
here to see the build come to life.
We must show strength. Blood calls for blood.